Eric Marin-Det. And now we got to turn it over to our teacher. Tonight, our teacher is Brad Gray. And Brad, you're rolling deep tonight. That's awesome. People don't even know who you are. Like, woo, that's good, looking good. Brad is a part of our community, and he's been serving in various, kind of all throughout the church in various ministries. He's working on a master's in divinity at a local school, and when he's not here, he travels around and speaks and has. So we were like, wait, he's going around teaching, and he's never taught us. That ain't right. So we said, Brad, just come, and he's going to teach this tonight's Lent lesson. So everybody, good evening, Brad Gray. And okay, these people, they appear civilized and laid back and everything, but they're unbelievably hungry. They're really serious. So let me pray for Brad, and then we'll go. God, we invite you into this place tonight. We know you're here. We know that you're present among us, and we don't want to miss anything you have for us tonight. God, shake us up, confront us, comfort us, guide us, show us what obedience looks like, show us what wonder and awe look like. God, we want to see the path of Jesus. We want to see the new life that Jesus offers us. This Lent season, as Brad walks us through what it means to leave Egypt in some very specific and really painful ways, we want to have the guts and courage to go to these difficult places. So, as you've done all day, you have empowered Brad to bring these words, and we acknowledge this is hard work, and we're grateful for that, and we're receptive, and we're ready to listen. So we thank you that you're so good, that you rescue and save us, and you give us hope. And in Jesus' name, everybody said,
Amen. Thank you. Well, good evening. I'd like to invite you to turn with me to Exodus chapter 25. And if you need a Bible, just throw up your hands and one of our fine ushers will bring one to you. But we've got a lot of ground to cover in the time that we have this evening, so let's jump right into this. Exodus chapter 25. And basically what's going on here is that Israel has been in bondage in Egypt, and God has brought them out with a mighty hand. And they've traveled through the wilderness, and they've come to this place called Mount Sinai. And Moses is up on the mountain meeting with God. And God and Moses are having this conversation, and God is giving Moses instructions on things that he wants Moses to do. And this is where we pick up part of the conversation, Exodus 25, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. These are the offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, and another durable leather, acacia wood, olive oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and the breastplate." So God here is just giving Moses these instructions, and not quite sure if Moses knows exactly what God is after, but God lands on what he is after here in verse 8. "Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them." God says, "I will dwell among them." Now, since the Israelites have come out of Egypt, they've been having problems finding food and water. They've been grumbling against Moses and Aaron. They've been thinking about what life was like and how great it was back in Egypt. They've been attacked by foreign enemies. And in the midst of all of this, God says, "Make me a tabernacle so that I can come and join you." The Israelites are just getting themselves into a mess, and in a short while they're going to be taking a 40-year tour of the wilderness. And in the midst of all of their problems and all of the ensuing issues, God's desire is not to take them out of their problems. God's desire is to enter into them with the Israelites. God's impulse is to join. Now turn with me to Mark chapter 9. And let's take a look at a story in the life of Jesus. And in Mark chapter 9, we'll begin in verse 14, page 932. And basically what's going on here is that Jesus, Peter, James, and John are coming down from what we traditionally call the Mountain of Transfiguration. And they're going to meet up with the other 9 disciples. And this is where the story picks up. Verse 14, when they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing about with them?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." So Jesus shows up on the scene, and there's just some bickering going on between the disciples and teachers of the law. And Jesus is like, what is going on here? And this father speaks up in the crowd. And he tells Jesus about a living hell that ensues when this evil spirit gets a hold of his boy. And he says, "I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they couldn't." And in verse 19, Jesus says, "You unbelieving generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. So this hell that takes place with this father becomes a living reality at their very feet the moment this evil spirit sees Jesus. And I want you to imagine for a few moments that you're this father. And I want you to imagine that someone you love, and if you're a parent, I want you to think about one of your children, is at your feet. And they're rolling around uncontrollably, foaming at the mouth, gnashing their teeth. And there isn't a single thing that you can do about it. And this is not the first time it has happened. It has happened time and time again. And every single time it happens, it rips another chunk out of your heart. And you cannot bear to witness another episode. This is what it's like for this father. And notice how Jesus responds. Verse 21. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" What? Jesus stands there in the midst of this chaos, this pain, this suffering, and asks a question? Later on in the story, Jesus heals this boy. So why not heal first and ask questions later? What is Jesus doing? Why does he ask a question? Well, I'd like to suggest that maybe part of the answer is actually in the question itself. Notice the question: how long has he been like this? What kind of a question is this? It's a question of care. It's a question of concern. It's a question of longing to know more. And it's ultimately a question that propels Jesus into the history with his Father. And ultimately a question that allows Jesus to enter into this Father's pain. Jesus' desire is to enter into the pain. And I think this tells us something very significant about Jesus. Maybe we could put it this way: that Jesus' first impulse is not to fix the pain, but to join it. Jesus' first impulse is not to heal the boy. I would like to suggest that this story isn't so much a story about what Jesus can do as much as it is a story about what Jesus is like. And Jesus' first impulse is not to fix the pain, but to join it. Now notice the Father's response to Jesus' question. Again, verse 21, Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Father says, "Jesus, if you can do absolutely anything, take pity on us and help us." Now these words, take pity, is the Greek verb splanchnizomai. Kind of a funny word, isn't it? And it just means to be moved with or to feel compassion or pity. But this is a very, very strong Greek verb, and it's derived from the Greek noun splanknon, which means bowels, intestines, inner parts. You see, it was thought that the bowels, the intestines, was a seat of love and pity. And so what this Father is saying is essentially, Jesus, I want you to enter into this pain so much that it makes your guts churn. Or maybe the way that we would say it is that Jesus would feel the pain so much that it would be gut-wrenching for him. And I find it so fascinating that the Father, when he says, "Jesus, if you can do anything," he doesn't first and foremost say, "Jesus, fix the pain." He says, "Jesus, feel the pain." And even this word, help us, isn't even the Greek word for fixing. He's just saying, "Jesus, if you can do anything, help us. But first of all, I need you to feel this. I need you to enter into this with me." I can relate to how this Father feels with something that has taken place in my own story. Last summer, my wife and I had the opportunity of going on a 5-week biblical study tour in Israel and Turkey. And we came back, and within just a couple of weeks of coming back, we found out that my wife was pregnant. And I will be completely honest with you, something got by the goalie. It happens. Wasn't planned. All of a sudden there's 2 lines on the little thing, and it came as such a shock. And my wife immediately was just ecstatic. Just absolutely ecstatic. And, I'm excited as well. I mean, I'm very, very excited at this point. And but immediately it's like, okay, we were just in all these different cities in, Israel. We got to figure out, where did this take place? Because you have to know, right? I'm sure that's like somewhere in Habakkuk or something. I mean, you just got to know, where did this take place? And so we're like trying to connect the dots, and The top likely result? Jerusalem. Yeah. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, our kid's going to come out speaking Hebrew, and we're going to have no problem memorizing Torah by the time they're 10. I mean, it was just, they're going to be brilliant. And so it was just great. And my wife was just thrilled. And, at the same time, I've got these voices going through my head saying things like, dude, you are way too immature to be a dad. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And you just got all these things that are going through your mind, like, well, I'm in school. How am I going to pay for this? And how, all these things just start coming to your mind. And finally, I got to the point where my wife was all along, and this is such a blessing. There are so many people that would do anything to be in our shoes. And it was just this overwhelming joy. And every single day we prayed, God, may we just have a successful pregnancy. May everything go well. And may our child, as it grows up, may it learn to love you with all of its heart, with all of its soul, with all of its might. And every day we prayed that this process would just go well. And then September 17th came along. It was a Sunday. We came to Mars in the morning, fantastic, and we just went home and we were enjoying the day. And all of a sudden my wife began bleeding. Not a whole lot, but enough that it had us concerned. And so we called the doctor and we said, hey, here's what's going on. And he just said, you know what, this is not totally abnormal. Don't freak out. But if she's still bleeding in the morning, let's just get her in and let's see what's going on. And so, sure enough, the morning came and my wife was still bleeding. And so we went to the doctor's office, which was about a half a mile down the road. Checked in. They took us back to the room where they have the ultrasound machine. And just this wonderful lady is in there. And she just, gets my wife, all prepared for this. And she begins the ultrasound. And it's not 30 seconds into the ultrasound that she just lifts her head up and looks at us and says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but you're at the beginning stages of a miscarriage. And for many of you, you have walked that path. And you've heard those words. And if you were like me, you were just overwhelmed at how many people were coming out of the woodwork on who had a miscarriage. It was like people saying, well, I had a miscarriage, or my mom had a miscarriage, or, my best friend. It was just on and on. It's something like between 20 and 25% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. And on the one hand, it was helpful knowing that so many people had been through it. But on the other hand, it wasn't helpful because I had no context for dealing with this. I had only had 2 conversations in my entire life about a miscarriage. And I just didn't know how to handle it. And the days and the weeks and the months that followed were very, very difficult. But like all difficult circumstances and situations, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself, and you also learn a lot about others. And we learned a lot about how people dealt with our pain. And so I just want to take a few moments here and just walk you through some of the things that my wife and I learned in this process. One of the things that we learned right away was that we have a propensity as people to want to avoid someone else's pain. People would ask me, hey, how are you? And I would tell them how I was really doing. And I noticed that people oftentimes would just completely change topics, completely divert the conversation so that this pain that I was giving out was not going to be received, but it was going to be avoided. And that we just began to realize it's kind of a natural instinct for many is to just avoid someone else's pain. Notice this quotation from Dan Allender's book, Leading with a Limp. He says, psycholinguists, those who study how we talk with each other, tell us that it is rare for a person to ask more than 2 meaningful questions of another person, especially if that other person is in distress. We want to help to quickly resolve the struggle, but we don't want to suffer someone else's helplessness or confusion. And so these words, how are you, became very confusing to me. Because after a while, it'd get to the point where someone would say, how are you? And immediately I was on the back of my heels thinking in my head, is that a greeting? Is that a statement? Is that a question? Do they really want to know how I am feeling? You see, we use these words differently. A couple of months ago, I was in East Africa. I was in Kenya. And I was walking through this place called Kibera, which is the largest slum in East Africa. And this interesting experience took place. And actually, have any of you seen the movie The Constant Gardener by any chance? Okay, that's Kibera, where they're walking around. And the same scene that happened to me literally happens to Rachel Weisz's character in The Constant Gardener. It's just incredible. And I hadn't seen the movie prior to this. It would probably have prepared me a little bit better. But I'm walking along this path, and just these unbelievably beautiful little boys and girls were lining the path. And as I'm walking, they're saying, how are you? And I'm like, well, fine, how are you? And then the next one, how are you? Well, fine, how are you? And every single one, how are you? And I had a guide with me who said, you know what they're saying, don't you? And I said, yeah, they're saying, how are you? And he said, no, they're not. They're saying, hey, white people. In their context, how are you equates with, hey, white people. And it just struck me. They use these words differently, just like we in America use these words differently. And so, what if as a Mars Hill community, a community that is serious about serving one another well, what if we made a pact here tonight that we would stop using the words, how are you, as a greeting if we don't sincerely intend them as a question? Because for someone who is going through grief, frustrations, struggles, these words, if they're not intended as a question, are very confusing and they're not helpful. Something else that I began to notice is that we have a propensity to want to fix things. And this is not just a male thing, which it often falls that way. But, it brought me back to my first year of marriage, when I became profoundly aware of my propensity to want to fix things. My wife would come home from school, and she would obviously be discouraged. And I would say, hi, honey, how was your day? And she would say, it was a rough day. I've got this one kid that wouldn't stop fooling around, and it didn't matter what I tried, I could not get him to stop misbehaving and just disrupting the whole class. And then I would say, well, what did you try? And she would say, well, I tried this and I tried that, and this didn't seem to work, so I did that. And I would say, well, of course those things wouldn't work. Why don't you try this? Or why don't you try that? And over and over and over again, because apparently I wasn't catching on, she would say, I don't want you to fix this. I simply want to be heard. Any of you had this conversation before? Anybody in the last 24 hours? Yeah, because there's just this thing within us that we want to fix things. But the reality is there are some things you just can't fix. 2 days ago, my wife and I, we went out to dinner. And we celebrated the delivery date of the baby we'll never have. There are some things you just can't fix. For those of you who have lost people, they're not coming back. For those of you who know someone who has a terminal illness, unless God works through the medication or just drops a miracle into them, you can't fix it. Notice Job chapter 13. If you're not familiar with the story of Job, it's a story about this guy that just absolutely loses everything. And this book of Job is essentially a biography of his story, but there's some autobiographical places in here where Job is speaking, and he gets to this point where his friends come and join him. He's got a few friends that come join him, and they sit with him for a while. But then they begin to open their mouth, and they begin saying things, and some things are true, and some things are just absolutely not true. And in many senses, they're very hurtful. In fact, one of the guys, Eliphaz, says in Job 4, he says, Job, the way I see it, people don't reap what they didn't sow. He basically says all this stuff is happening to you because you've done something, you've sinned, and God's angry at you, and it's totally untrue as you read the story. But Job gets to the point where he's responding to them. And he says in Job 13 verse 1, my eyes have seen all of this. My ears have heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you, but I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case with God. You, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent. For you, that would be wisdom. See, there is a lot of wisdom in Job's comment about wisdom. That so often we want to say things, we want to use words in some kind of tough situation. But maybe sometimes our greatest gift to one another is not our words, but our silence and our presence. Because what I found out is that oftentimes when people are trying to say something helpful, it's not. And in many cases, it's just downright annoying what people are saying. People would say things to my wife and I like, you know what, you're young. I'm sure you'll get pregnant again. Or they would say things like, statistically speaking, you're more likely to have a successful pregnancy the second time around than the first. Or, and I don't know about for you, but for me, I just got so sick of it. Just don't quote me Romans 8:28, which says, thank you. For in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and who are called according to His purpose. That might be all well, good and true, but at times the truth isn't helpful. That oftentimes the words we try to put to tough situations are just better left unsaid. And sometimes that's hard for us in dealing with situations that make us awkward because there's really no step-by-step process through it. something else that you don't know about this story is that on September 17th, and this was just 6 months ago when my wife and I were a few weeks into our second trimester, the very day that we lost our firstborn child is the exact same day that my best friend and his wife gave birth to their firstborn child. There's no easy 5-step process to walk with someone through that. There's no nicely laid out pamphlet that says this is how you deal with a friend of yours who is going through something like this. It's tough. It's messy. It's not clearly laid out how you are to respond to someone who is in pain. And I began to understand as well that, people that, whether it in words were trying to be helpful, they weren't doing it maliciously. They weren't trying to say things that were going to be unhelpful and just hurtful. And people don't try to just fix things because they're just trying to upset you. There's something deeper going on. And what I began to understand is that people could not embrace my pain if they hadn't embraced their own. That you cannot embrace the pain of someone else if you haven't dealt with your own pain. Because what happens is that if I start giving you my pain, and you are on the other end, and this pain is start coming towards you, if you haven't dealt with the pain inside of you, all of a sudden these red lights start flashing, and this voice says, warning, warning, overload, overload. Because if you haven't dealt with your own pain, you do not have the capacity to deal with someone else's pain. But like this father in Mark 9, my wife and I longed for people that could embrace our pain. For people that wouldn't avoid it, who wouldn't try to fix it, who wouldn't just try to put all these words with it, that could simply enter into it with us. Notice this passage from Galatians. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Paul is writing here. And the assumption Paul is working with isn't some people have burdens and some people don't. Paul's assumption is that we all have burdens. And there's a double command going on here. There's a command on the one hand that we would allow people to help us carry our burdens. And the flip side is that we would then carry the burdens of one another. And when Paul says, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ, this idea of the law of Christ centers around this understanding that Christ did for us what we could not do for ourselves. And Paul's command here is do for one another what they cannot do for themselves, namely carry their own burdens. Paul says we've all got them, and we've got to help carry the load. And for my wife and I, we found that the people who served us best were the people that did this, that entered into it. And that, like we see with God and the Israelites and with Jesus and this Father, the people who served us with best were the people whose first impulse wasn't to try to fix things, but to join in our pain. And it all centered around this idea of taking whatever posture is necessary to serve those who are in need. And this posture looked different for different people. My best friend called me up, and the conversation was awkward, it was weird, but it was totally bathed in love. And he did most of the speaking, and this is what he said. He said, Brad, I love you. I'm sorry. And if it takes you 1 month, if it takes you 6 months, if it takes you a year, if it takes you 2 years before you can even lay eyes on my daughter, then I am absolutely okay with that. Because I will take whatever posture necessary to serve you the best. And that posture looked like that for my best friend. For other people, it was different. For other people, it was an email just saying, hey, we're with you. Or a phone call, or a card. For some people, it was sending us flowers, which was an amazing gift. Because as I walked around my house and saw all these different flowers, it was a continual reminder to my wife and I, God has not abandoned us. God is with us. The smells, the colors, the intricacies. That was a reminder God is here. For other people, it was bringing us meals, which was fantastic. My wife and I went an entire month without making a single meal. And all of that time that you put together that you would have spent making meals was time that we got to sit in the moments of pain and grief and truly experience the grace of God. One lady brought us over 2 meals. She was at the door and she came in and she was so excited. Outstanding woman, just amazing woman. And she said, if there was 2 meals that I could eat, it would be these 2 meals. And it was great because it was like, one was like this honey barbecue pork chops with these like cinnamon apples weaved in. And the other one was these really thick pieces of chicken that was stuffed with cream cheese and chives and wrapped in bacon. Oh, I mean, the calorie count was just like out of control, but it was so good. And for other people, it was showing up at the house and sitting with us. And if we wanted to talk about it, we did. And if we didn't want to talk about it, we didn't. And all of this started taking place a couple of months after the new Exodus teaching this past summer. And in the second teaching with Sinai, the location, Rob and Don unpacked what it meant to be a kingdom of priests, because God called the Israelites to be a kingdom of priests. And the idea that a priest was someone who mediated the divine. And that essentially God's call on the Israelites was to live life in such a way that when people interacted with you, they were actually interacting in a way with God. And it got to the point that every time the doorbell rang, the thought would run through my mind, God is at the door. Whether it was in delivering meals, flowers, coming to sit with us. God was at the door because whoever was at the door was reflecting this impulse of desiring to join and enter into our pain. And those people who took that posture and reflected that impulse served us the best. Because like this father in Mark 9, we needed someone to join us. And as I think about this father, I can't help but wonder, did he know that he needed someone to walk with him prior to his encounter with Jesus? Or was it something that Jesus said that triggered an awareness that he needed someone to journey with him? This question that Jesus asked, how long has he been like this? We've explored already how Jesus asked this question as a way for he himself to get further into the story of this father. But I wonder if Jesus, in all of his brilliance, not only asked this question so that he could enter more deeply into this father's story, but that he asked this question so the father could go more deeply into his own story. And it was at the point of this question that this father became aware that he needed someone to journey with him. So what if we took this question and what if we flipped it around a little bit and we asked it this way? How long have you been like this? How long have you been in pain? How long have you been struggling? How long have you been addicted? How long have you been unwilling to forgive someone? How long have you been carrying around guilt? How long have you been bearing a burden that is of no fault of your own? How long have you been looking on your own junk and saying things like, it's not really all that bad? How long have you been in Egypt? How long have you been like this? You see, for these last few weeks, we've been journeying through this thing called Lent. And we've been exploring what are those Egypts that are in our life, those things that just have us in bondage. And we've explored a lot of different topics, talking about putting to death the false self, and talking about just our need to have control, the way we use our words, the way we view life and the journey. And we've explored so many different things. And I wonder for how many of us we're trying to go this journey alone. That we're trying to leave Egypt by ourselves. When the reality is, you cannot leave Egypt alone. You cannot leave Egypt alone. You were not designed to walk alone. You have not been created with a capacity to carry your own burdens and to be healthy in the process. It just doesn't work that way. And when you try to walk alone, you become tired. You become weary. You begin to lose hope. You begin saying things like, well, that's never going to change. I'm never going to get rid of that. I'm never going to be different. Saying things like, how long is this going to be with me? It's because when we try to walk alone, it doesn't work. I've been there. It's discouraging. You lose hope. You get tired. And so what we want to do here is we want to just give you some time and space to allow yourself to look at your own story. And we're going to do something we've done here at Mars before, but we want to just engage in a little communal activity. Notice first this passage from James. Is anyone among you astheneo? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. This word astheneo is the Greek word that means weary, tired, worn out. It's where we get the word anesthetic. It carries the connotation when you get to the point where you feel like you can't go on. Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with the oil in the name of the Lord. If you are astheneo, we want to give you that opportunity. So I'd like to ask just for all who are involved, the elders, the prayer team, just to come forward. And we just want to take some time just to sing some songs. And maybe for those of you who have been journeying through Lent and you've done the hard work and you've dug up all of these things, but you just don't know where to put them. And you've been trying to walk through that alone. In our eyes and in full love, we say that's absolutely unacceptable. Because we need to journey with one another. Maybe for some of you, your marriage is just not where it needs to be. And maybe other people think that you and your spouse just have this phenomenal marriage, but you two know our marriage is going downhill quickly. Maybe you just come up and allow us to pray for you. Maybe for those of you who have been addicted for a very long time, maybe you just come forward and say, I'm addicted to, and you don't even have to say, but just allow us to pray for you. If you have a physical ailment, something that's just really holding you back, we would love to just wrap our arms around you and pray with you. Maybe for some of you, you've had an experience like my wife and I recently, where you've recently gone through a miscarriage, and it is just really weighing you down. There's a group here called Echo that deals with people who have gone through miscarriages, and they're going to be right over here. And if you are struggling with infertility or anything along those lines, feel free to come over here, and they'd love to pray for you. And whatever it is that's holding you back, if you feel as though you'd like to come forward, we would invite you to do that. And here's something else that I would invite those of you who don't come forward to do, is that if you see somebody that you know coming to the front, get out of your chair and come join them. Come pray with them. And if you don't come up and somebody you don't know comes up, then why don't you just pick some people that are coming up, people you don't even know, and just sit there and pray for them. Because we cannot leave our Egypts alone. And may we just have some time and space to journey with each other, to help carry the load, because we were not designed to carry it alone. We're going to have people around the stage for quite a while afterwards, so if you just felt like, I want to go up there but I didn't, we're going to have people here, and it's open for as long as it needs to be. So feel free to come forward if you'd like. And let me just close us out in a benediction. My brothers and sisters of the Mars Hill community, may you leave here today realizing you cannot leave Egypt alone. May you invite Jesus, and may you invite others to walk with you in your journey. And as we are invited into one another's